WFLA Now will begin momentarily. WFLA Now will begin momentarily. Breaking news on WFLA Now. Here is JB Buno.
Moments ago, we have learned that the Derek Chauvin trial and the jury in it has reached a verdict, and we are about an hour away or so, folks, from learning that verdict here from Minneapolis, Minnesota. The jury deliberating about a day and a half, and moments away from finding out the fate of Derek Chauvin. Hey there, folks. JB Buno here with you live in the WFLA Now Stream Center here. Let's take you quickly live to the court feed. This is what we're going to be monitoring here very, very closely over the next hour. We've been told that we're about 45 or so minutes away from learning the verdict here in the Derek Chauvin trial. A lot to get to here as we await the jury's verdict here being read aloud in the courtroom. You'll be able to hear it. Really, the world will be able to hear it here momentarily in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've been given a time of approximately 4:30 Eastern time, and we're going to get the verdict. Could be sooner than that, depending on the developments here within the next 45 minutes. So we're going to be keeping an eye here on this feed from Minneapolis. But in the meantime, I'd like to bring in criminal trial attorney here in the Tampa Bay area, that being Bryant Camerano. Bryant, thanks so much for joining us here again on WFLA Now. What are you watching for? And again, we're just moments away from finding out the verdict and perhaps one of the most meaningful trials in recent memory.
Well, I agree. One of the most memorable trials. And basically what I think that the quick verdict and quick in relative terms, clearly it's evidence of guilt of something. I'm not quite sure which of the different degrees of murder that they're going to take into consideration. But yeah, it's relatively quick in light of what's all at stake and what was shown as far as evidence. The issue is, again, what is the ultimate verdict as to which of the charges? It could be all three. It could be one of one of the three. And so we'll see. But at this point, my gut tells me, my instinct tells me, my experience that it's leaning towards the guilt of one of the three charges.
And what makes you, and that's very interesting that you say that, because that was going to be my next question here, Brian. What makes you say that your gut as a criminal trial attorney, again, joining us from Camerano Law here in the Tampa Bay area, what is that gut feeling that makes you lean towards a guilty verdict at this stage?
Well, a couple of things. One, I think if it was a not guilty, I think if it was a unanimous not guilty, I think they would have decided as early as yesterday. I don't think they would have waited an additional day. I think there may have been one or two holdouts in terms of what degree of guilt, but I think that that's perhaps why they deliberated some more today. Again, just the quickness. I think if they had felt not guilt, I think by yesterday. So, but it would have been decided by yesterday evening, the latest. But because there was so much evidence of guilt in this video, the issue is what degree of guilt. That I think it was clearly they're all in agreement. A homicide occurred, the death by the hands of another. But now let's decide to what degree. That's what my gut tells me. I don't think they can ignore the video and how damaging that video was and come back with a not guilty.
When you look at the cases presented, Bryant, by both the prosecution and by the defense, the bulk of the testimony, the bulk of really this weeks-long trial has been presented by the prosecution. I think that there were some that were a little bit surprised that there wasn't more that the defense took as little time as it did to make their case in response to the prosecution. Did that surprise you as well here in this case, that the defense was so concise with its points, or trials such as this?
No, I think that the defense attorney's hands were tied. I said this yesterday. I think he had to rebut that video, but he used that video to some extent towards his client's advantage by saying, don't just focus on these 9 minutes and 28 seconds. Look at the bigger picture. Look at the 18 minutes that preceded this. And I think that's all he had. You know, he had some expert witnesses that rebutted some of the state's expert witnesses. But at the end, you know, it was just really a conflict of the witnesses, the expert witnesses. But in the end, the jury is just going to look at the video and say, I just can't ignore this. So it didn't surprise me that he was straight to the point. I think he did a great job with what he had by reminding the jurors, hey, there's more than just these 9 minutes. Look at that. And I'm sure they did look at that, but then they had no choice but to then refocus back on those last 9 minutes before he passed away. So I wasn't surprised that that's all he had and how quick his defense was, because there was nothing much more that he could have done.
If you're just joining us here on WFLA.com, the WFLA app, or perhaps one of our social media pages such as Facebook or YouTube, JB Buno here with you live in our stream center alongside Bryant Camareno, who we've been leaning on here for expertise in regards to the Derek Chauvin trial here out of Minneapolis, of course, and the death of George Floyd. If you're just joining us, we're keeping an eye very, very closely here on this live feed right here. This is the feed from the courtroom in Minneapolis. They zoom in here on this seal when there isn't an active conversation taking place, when it's just really when they're in a stagnant portion of the proceedings. So when we see something happen here, folks, that's expected within the next 45 minutes, really the next 35 minutes now, we are, of course, going to just take you right there and listen in as the judge gets ready for the verdict being read aloud here in the courtroom. Also here in the WFLA Now Stream Center, we're here to answer your questions, especially while we have Bryant here and his expertise as a criminal trial attorney here in the Tampa Bay area. If you see the hashtags on our screen, you see them here underneath both of our names here on the left and right side of your screens. Hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyBryant. We'll look for some of those questions or comments here in the Facebook Live comment section. We can animate them on screen. Of course, with this being quite the emotional topic here and talking about the death of George Floyd and the trial of Derek Chauvin, we're going to only put up comments and questions, of course, that are appropriate in language, nothing inflammatory, of course. We're going to be looking for those hashtag comments here momentarily. Bryant, one of the things that before we start to take some questions and comments out of the Facebook Live comment section here, one of the things that has really come into laser focus over the last 36 hours are these charges. We're talking about second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and then second-degree manslaughter. I want to cycle back to when you said that you had a gut feeling that this is going to be a guilty verdict. Are you talking about one of these three charges that you have a gut feeling about? Are you talking about a combination of two of the three? Because they're being treated separately. They're individual charges, and there can be multiple guilty verdicts, as I understand it, on multiple charges here. So what's your feeling on the three charges based on what we know from Minnesota law?
I think that again, just based on what I've seen so far in the trial, what I've seen throughout the trial, my gut tells me that the jury was leaning towards the culpable negligence, which is the least degree. Again, they could easily come back with the higher degrees. You know, to call someone a murderer, you know, even though short of intentional murder, I get it, but this murder is such a strong connotation. Extreme indifference or reckless indifference of human life. I think that at a minimum, the jury's going to agree, look, he was negligent. He was grossly negligent. And by not listening to the demands of the people who qualify to render an opinion at the time, get off, you're hurting him, you're killing him, and to ignore the cries of Mr. Floyd himself. So at a minimum, I think the jury has proven the culpable negligence, which is the least amount of the lesser degrees of all the three offenses. Above that, you know, it's a little bit difficult to say if they really thought that he was, acting with such inhumane indifference to human life. I think there's something to be said, again, giving credit to the defense attorneys. There was so much distraction going on. Was he just being ignorant? Was he being callous? You know, when the prosecutor said that Mr. Floyd had a big heart and Mr. Chauvin had a small heart, I think that was a very effective argument in closing arguments. I don't know if they proved that. I don't know if he was actually doing what he did with such indifference to human life. I just honestly think every video you see of Mr. Chauvin is him looking around. It's not really looking and focusing on what's at hand. So again, my gut tells me that the jury can agree he was just culpably negligent. He should have stopped, got up, let the gentleman breathe, let him survive. But he was too busy distracted. I don't think they're going to sit there and I may be wrong, but I don't think they can sit there and say that he went in there with so much hatred in his heart, so much callousness that he was hoping that this gentleman would die, and somebody would. So that's why I'm thinking at a very minimum, the third offense, which is the culpable negligence.
Yeah, and for those of you curious about the sentences potentially for those charges, each charge here, the murder charges come with the possibility of 40 years in prison for the second-degree unintentional murder, 25 years for third-degree murder, 10 years for second-degree manslaughter. I see a lot of your comments. I'm keeping an eye on them. I see a lot of them coming in here with hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyBryant here in the Facebook Live comment section. We'll get to them in just a moment. But I want to ask you, Bryant, here because, as I understand it, Minnesota has presumptive sentencing guidelines, which for a person with no criminal history, basically, it's a fallback to pre-existing guidelines where if there is a guilty verdict on one of the charges, it comes with a presumptive sentence. So the murder charges have a presumptive sentence of 12 and a half years in prison. Manslaughter has a presumptive sentence of 4 years. This is both out of Minnesota, folks. In the sentencing phase, if it is a guilty verdict on either of these three charges, they can argue past the presumptive sentencing guidelines. Is that correct?
That's correct. And from what I understand, and most states have this standard, that there is a guideline range that gives the courts some guidance as to what's appropriate to avoid any disparity, to make sure that everyone's sentenced equally. However, the courts can take into consideration aggravating factors and mitigating factors. Here, my understanding, one mitigating factor would be this officer's past military service. From my understanding, he was in the military for, I think, approximately 10 years. But the aggravating factor that I've read was that he had other prior allegations of misconduct. And so that could be an aggravating factor. And so, absolutely, just because there's a presumptive range doesn't mean the judge's hands are tied. However, what it does do is, in most states, including Minnesota, if the judge exceeds that presumptive guideline, that recommendation, then it does come with an extra layer of protection, so to speak, at the appellate court to go look and say, was this justified to exceed? To avoid any disparity, was this judge justified in exceeding what we think is a presumptive guideline recommendation of a range? And so if the judge does that, it may automatically cause the appellate court to review it, not necessarily saying it's going to reverse the sentencing aspect, but it could. So most judges are really cautious. Unless they can justify why they're going to exceed it, they're going to stay within the guideline range.
And we've been talking a lot here, folks, about a lot of outcomes and sentences, potential for sentences. This is all provided that we have a guilty verdict on one or more of these three charges. There is, of course, the chance that we have not guilty, not guilty, not guilty on all three charges. Emergency orders have been put into effect for the response that would occur in the event that Derek Chauvin walks out of that Minneapolis courtroom as a free man if no guilty is read 3 consecutive times. Minneapolis, Minnesota, really the entire state of Minnesota, a lot of the Midwest bracing for the worst tonight in the event that does in fact happen. But we're going to know in about 30 or so minutes from now. We got some questions here coming in, Bryant. I'm going to try to get to these two really quickly before we have to let you go. I know that we're going to try to bring you back in here in a moment. But Taryn here, hashtag HeyBryant, why did this trial wait so long to happen? The accused, of course, has a right to a speedy trial. I actually thought that this was somewhat speedy given how long some cases take to actually reach a courtroom. We have cases here in the state of Florida that take months, years to reach the courtroom floor. So did you think that this was a speedy trial here in Minneapolis?
No, I agree. I think it was actually pretty fast compared to Florida standards. Florida standards, the Florida Supreme Court suspended or pulled speedy trial rights for almost a year. And so, and I think it's still in effect. So this was actually pretty quick. It could have been a strategic decision based on the part of law enforcement, or the defendant, I should say, and his lawyer, or it could have been the state's decision that we want a speedy trial. So I think that, I was somewhat surprised. I don't think it took that long in terms of comparing to other types of cases. So it was relatively quick. Tampa, I think here in Florida alone, this case would have not been tried at this point. I think another 6 months or so compared to when this event happened.
Really quickly before we let you go, Bryant, Deborah here asking about Maxine Waters' comments. For those of you unfamiliar, was on Saturday night, Representative Maxine Waters called for protesters to stay on the streets and get more confrontational if Derek Chauvin is found not guilty. That was a set of remarks that was slammed by the judge here in this case. Brian, just quickly, your response to Maxine Waters' comments, an elected official saying those things in advance of the actual verdict being read.
You know, it's interesting. The jury was sequestered, so I think the judge made a comment. I'm not going to grant a mistrial. This may be a basis for an appeal, but I think many experts agree that if that jury was sequestered, no one would have heard Maxine Waters' comments. And so in terms of the jury, so I don't see at this point any prejudice unless somehow it leaked to the jury. So, you know, I'm not going to comment if it was responsible or not. I mean, we all have a First Amendment right to speak our mind. So she did. And I just don't think it rose to the level that a judge would have granted a mistrial, which he didn't, or that an appellate court might say that this affected the outcome of the jurors. I don't see that. Again, I think that's why the judge sequestered them, knowing that something like this might happen. But that's not to say, though, that if there's any proof down the road that that jury found out what that comment was and it impacted their decision-making, then absolutely can come back on appeal. But that's almost next to impossible to prove.
Brian Camerano joining us here from Camerano Law, criminal trial attorney here in the Tampa Bay area. Brian, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll let you go. If you'd like to hop back on as we get closer to the verdict at 4:30 Eastern time, of course, the floor is open. You're welcome to do so. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, as we continue here live on WFLA Now, JB Buno here with you live in the WFLA Now Stream Center. We're about to be joined by Aid on Your Side investigator Masa Saidi. Let's reset here really quickly. For those of you just joining us here, we're about 30 minutes away from the verdict being read here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The verdict will be read aloud in the courtroom. This is going to be a moment in history. All eyes really in this country, around the world, will be glued here on what's going on and what's unfolding here with the jury here in the Minneapolis courtroom, where Derek Chauvin is on trial, accused of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in the death of George Floyd last year. That 8+ minute video that by all, I would imagine that most of us, if not all of us, have seen by now, and we have been waiting to find out whether or not Derek Chauvin will be facing any jail time for what transpired last year. I'd like to bring in Masa Saidi. Masa, if you want to scoot a little bit to your left and we can bring you in here. Masa, maybe we can let people know here a little bit about your background as a prosecutor in New York City. You know a little bit about what goes on in these types of situations, and what are you looking for here within the next half hour?
Well, first, so we know that this jury, they deliberated for about 4 hours yesterday, and then they went back to their hotel to be sequestered, and they've been sequestered throughout this process. And this is a huge day, as you said, JB. The fact that this verdict is about to be read in about 30 minutes, this is going to be a moment that we all remember. Where were you when this verdict came in? So this is a huge deal. When that video of George Floyd first surfaced here in the country, I mean, it was incredibly moving. It sparked protests across the country. So this is a huge moment, and this verdict came fairly quickly on the second day that this jury was deliberating. What could it mean? I would never try to guess what that means, JB, but this did come fairly quickly. I have to check to see what time the jury started to deliberate this morning.
9 a.m.
It was 10 a.m. actually. So let's do the math really quick. So 4 hours yesterday, 10 a.m. to now.
Yeah, time zone difference there, but yes.
6. Okay, yeah, so time zone difference. We're trying to figure it out. But about 10 hours, this jury reached their verdict. We know that there was 3 weeks of testimony, that these jurors, these 12 men and women, they heard from 45 witnesses, mostly witnesses from the prosecution. I believe the prosecution had 27 witnesses. It was a very compelling testimony. I got to watch it just several times for brief moments, but we know that this was very compelling, what was said here in court. And that video really is going to be the thing that likely stuck with jurors. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here in this case. But as you said, he's facing 3 charges: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. And the most serious charge, obviously, is second-degree murder. And the max there is up to 40 years. But because he doesn't have any priors, sentencing guidelines say it should be about 11 to 15 years that he should get for that. Same thing, third-degree murder, up to 25 years he could face if the jury decides that he's convicted of that. But again, the recommendation is 10 years, and then it's a 4 years recommendation for the second-degree manslaughter. But a huge day. Everyone is stopping. Our newsroom, it was like, when we found out that the verdict came in, I was surprised. I didn't expect that it was going to come in this quickly. A little bit caught off guard there, but.
Right. And back to Bryant Camerano and what he was talking about here. If there was a hung jury, and if there was perhaps some disagreement amongst the jurors themselves, this is something that could extend several days into Wednesday or Thursday. But now that we have a decision here, a verdict, we don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. But again, based on Bryant, who knows quite a bit about criminal law here in the Tampa Bay area and has been in a courtroom, you have been in a courtroom, we're hearing sort of momentum here for a increasing likelihood for at least one guilty verdict here on one of the three charges. But again, if you're just joining us, we're going to find out in about 25 minutes time for this big moment. Let's take a moment here to update our hashtags. You see hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyMasa here on the left and right side of your screens on the yellow stripes beneath our names. If you'd like to have your comment featured, again, we're only going to be featuring comments that are appropriate for air, that don't contain any inappropriate language. So I'm going to be looking for those comments and those questions here, folks. If you use those two hashtags starting now, hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyMasa here in the Facebook Live. I'll also keep an eye here on the YouTube comment section as well. I know we're live here on YouTube, but really all eyes right now are on this seal. This is the live courtroom feed showing the great seal of the state of Minnesota. This is actually a live feed from the courtroom itself with audio turned off. When there's action on this camera, they're going to zoom out, show the entire courtroom. You're going to start to see individuals, including Chauvin himself, get seated and file in here. The judge will take his position. The jurors will be called in. A verdict will be read aloud, and we'll know once and for all what we have here as far as a verdict. So that's coming your way in about 20 to 25 minutes from now here live from Minnesota. So I'm keeping my eyes here on the live feed from the courtroom, and we also here have an eye on the Facebook Live comment section. Masa, so we're going to...
So I think it's important at this point. It was obviously very important for both sides to make sure that the makeup of the jury was, fair, would represent the community. And we know that this jury has 4 white women, 2 white men, 3 black men, 1 black woman, and 2 women who identify themselves as multiracial. We know these people range in age from 20 to 60. So this is a very diverse jury pool, and that's important in this case because obviously this case touches on race, to put it very mildly, and these jurors had to unanimously all agree on a verdict, and they have. And what we don't know is it second-degree murder, is it third-degree murder, or second-degree manslaughter, or are they going to acquit him today? But this is a moment that law enforcement across the country, including here in Florida, they are prepared. Obviously, tensions very high. Especially in Minneapolis, but again, across the country in major cities, they are ready for we hope it doesn't happen, but for any potential backlash if people are not happy with whatever this verdict is, JB.
Yeah, and that's the question that we have coming in here now in the Facebook Live comment section. It comes from Jeff, and again, we can feature your comments only if you use one of the 2 hashtags that we have here on screen. Jeff Clevenger, hashtag HeyJB, what do you think the damage to property will be if not guilty is the decision? And again, as a reminder, it's got to be not guilty, not guilty, not guilty for Derek Chauvin, the ex-Minneapolis police officer, to walk out of that courtroom as a free man. And the damage to property, I think it goes without saying, is going to be massive. And it's going to be a chaotic situation across the country. You're going to see some of the, we of course have been following all the emergency orders that have been put into effect. We all remember what happened last summer, the George Floyd protests and riots that occurred here in the United States in various cities and various sections of the country. Really, it was widespread. And likely, if it's not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, Masa, I would imagine that we're going to see very similar to what we saw last summer. Widespread reaction and probably quite a bit of destruction out there, especially in the Midwest, especially in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, and the surrounding states there as well.
Well, I can say that we're not in the business of, predicting what's going to happen here, but what I can say is that video was incredibly painful to watch. I think for everyone it was incredibly painful to watch, and if it should happen that there is a not guilty verdict on all 3 charges here, certainly I would expect there to be a reaction to that, obviously, JB, as you said.
And it's a reaction too. It's a reaction too that could exist here in the state of Florida. We saw, we're here in the Tampa Bay area. We saw supporters of George Floyd take to the streets, and while protests were mostly peaceful, and we saw demonstrations that mostly were safe. Many of them, of course, there were protests and demonstrations that crossed the line as far as destruction of public property and destruction of we just saw just such an emotional response here in the state of Florida.
Which is completely understandable. Emotional response across the country. It's very interesting as closing arguments began yesterday. Governor DeSantis was here in Polk County. He was in Winter Haven introducing his anti-riot bill. So as this trial was coming to an end yesterday, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was announcing measures to make sure that there would be no what he calls rioting in the state. So his bill is now law, and there are severe punishments here in Florida. If you riot, if you destroy property, there is going to be a big reaction from the state. If any local governments, tell police to stand down and such, this is all what the governor was saying, the purpose behind his very controversial anti-rioting bill that is now law here in Florida. So.
Let's talk about this here from, again, #KJV, #KMASA. We are about 20 minutes away from a verdict being read here in the courtroom. We'll show them one more time just so that you can see it. We can all see it. This is the live courtroom feed where the camera here is going to zoom out from this seal here inside the courtroom, show us everybody file in, and then the jurors, of course, will be taken into the courtroom. And we will hear the verdict on all 3 charges: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. And it'll be interesting. Oh, okay, so we hear something. Let's listen in here for a second. There's some audio coming from the courtroom. Let's just listen in here, folks. We're hearing some doors opening and closing here. It seems as if they're starting to be a little bit of prep work going on here in the courtroom as they get ready here for people starting to file in. Let's go split screen here for you and show you inside the courtroom here on the left side of your screen. We're going to be monitoring that feed extremely closely, about 15 to 20 minutes away from actual action here in the courtroom itself, with individuals starting to file back in. On the right side of your screen, this is live from outside of the courthouse now. You can see that there is a gathering here outside the courthouse. I would imagine now, with an hour heads up, Masa, this is very, very interesting here. With 1 hour heads up, this gives now a good amount of time for folks in Minneapolis, Minnesota to congregate here outside of the courthouse. So this 1 hour heads up, there's going to be this massive group that swells in size outside of the Minneapolis courthouse. And I would imagine that there's going to be a lot of live cameras showing the reaction outside. And I think that regardless of whether or not it's one guilty, multiple guilty, or all not guilty, I think you're going to see quite the visible emotional reaction from folks here in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Absolutely. And I just checked the Minnesota Police Department's Twitter page to see if they were saying anything right now. And the last tweet was yesterday, quoting the chief of the Minnesota Police Department. And he said, quote, "We want peaceful assembly. We know that we have a city that is mourning, that they are in grief. The last thing we want to do is turn this into an enforcement situation." So they will be prepared to control the crowds if they have to. And again, the last tweet from the Minnesota Police Department that they don't want to have to do that, and they understand that the city is mourning. So I'm going to keep checking Twitter to see if there's any messages being given out to people on the city there. City of Minnesota, again, the last tweet was...
We're engaging a new digital audience here on WFLA.com, the WFLA app, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We're live in a whole lot of places. Welcome to the WFLA Now Stream Center here, where we're monitoring the action both inside and outside the Minneapolis courtroom. We have just been told here moments ago that Derek Chauvin has arrived at the courthouse with his attorney. Now they're going to start filing in here into the courtroom, and once that begins, you're going to see on the left side of your screen there, the camera zoom out. We're going to see Derek Chauvin come in. We're going to see the judge come in. All the necessary participants in the courtroom are going to be filing in, and then, of course, the jurors themselves will be let in here as well. On the right side of your screen, I would imagine that this crowd is going to continue to grow in size. As we await the decision here, folks, here in the here on WFLA Now, here from Minneapolis, Minnesota, we're going to continue to take your questions and comments here. Just try to keep you company as we await the decision here, the verdict here from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And
yeah,
JB,
Masa.
you know, it's been such a long, if you think about those jurors, they're doing their service. It's been such a long emotional journey for them. And within 2 days, they were able to come up with their verdict here. And, you know, if we want to talk about the charges, should we talk about that? What each of the charges are, what they mean? Yeah, because not only don't I want to talk about the charges, I want to answer this next question. Again, hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyMasa, if you'd like for us to answer your question here in the Facebook Live comment section, because Adelaide Wilson here asks, hashtag HeyJB, so he is looking at less than 20 years total if he's found guilty on all three charges, question mark. And the reason why I bring this up is because, again, the presumptive sentencing guidelines, as Masa noted earlier, without priors, for each murder charge, it's 12.5 years in prison, while manslaughter is a presumptive sentence of 4 years. So would those terms be consecutive or not? And I, as I understand it, each one is separate. So it could be a max of 29 years. But as a reminder, with the presumptive guidelines can be argued in court once the sentencing portion of the proceedings begin, and the judge can hear arguments for going beyond the presumptive sentence standard in Minnesota. So we need to remember here that we don't know what the verdict is just yet, but yes, there is a presumptive sentence of 12.5 years per murder charge and then 4 years for the manslaughter charge. Okay, so talking about those charges now, we'll start with the most serious charge, second-degree murder. So this is basically, in many cases, referred to as felony murder. So in this case, the prosecution argued that this police officer was committing a felony assault on George Floyd when he died in the process. So there doesn't have to be an intent to necessarily kill him. You're just committing a felony. You're in the process of committing a felony, and then someone dies as a result. Max is 40 years in that case, but if you have no priors, as JB said, it's most likely going to be about 11 to 15 years in that situation. The next most serious charge he's facing is third-degree murder, and this is a death that happened when the defendant, the police officer in this case, was acting extremely dangerously without regard to human life. And in this case, the prosecution argued that putting his knee on the neck of George Floyd as he was calling for help for, was it 9 minutes, JB?
Yeah, 9 minutes plus. The video was 8 minutes plus, but the actual, from the time that Derek Chauvin kneeled down his knee on the back of George Floyd's neck to the moment where paramedics relieved him in that moment, it was 9 minutes plus on the streets there in Minneapolis.
And the argument there is that this police officer knew that was potentially lethal and obviously a violation of any training that he had. That's up to 25 years, but because this officer does not have any priors, the recommendation is about 10 years ordinarily. And I don't know enough about how sentencing is done in Minnesota to know what's going to happen in that case, if the judge has to follow it or doesn't have to follow it. I don't know if your prior guest had any knowledge there. But the final least serious charge that he is facing is second-degree manslaughter, and this is basically negligence, that he was negligent, that he knew that causing death or serious harm and was possible.
You know,
go ahead.
I'm really just curious what the response is going to be if it's not guilty, not guilty, guilty. Because second-degree manslaughter is perhaps based on some legal experts and based on some of the reading that I've done over the last 36 hours is considered a possibility here. And let's just say we're gonna, for argument's sake here, we're just gonna say it's a conviction on second-degree manslaughter, and that's it. That he is that it's not guilty on both of the murder charges. What will the reaction be in Minneapolis? Because again, it's a presumptive sentence of 4 years in prison. And what would the reaction be to Derek Chauvin getting 4 years in prison and George Floyd not being here on this earth anymore? It's going to be, of course, we're going to watch it all unfold before our very eyes. I want to get to some of the questions and comments that are coming in here. Adelaide, thanks a lot. And I know that I'm missing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments and questions here with our hashtags. So I'm going to read this one here from Doris. Hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyMasa. There's only one verdict that should be reached. This is very important. It will impact how Black, Brown, and Latino communities view policing in America, and the world will see how the system deals with racism. That's an interesting comment here from Doris.
And to chime in here, JB, as you were saying, what if it's just manslaughter? I think that the people that have been out there, protesting, if it's not, guilty on second-degree murder, I think they're going to obviously be upset.
Right.
I think that's the charge that they want to see this officer convicted of.
Thank you. No, I'm sorry, Masa, continue.
Yeah, I was just saying that, what you were saying earlier, will people be upset if it's just manslaughter? Yes, the people that have been protesting, the people that have been out there every single day, and the people that feel like they never, in these types of situations have justice, they would be upset. Because this, I think we can all safely say that this was one of the most alarming videos when it came out, the death of George Floyd, what we saw there. So,
Doris, thanks a lot for your comment. We have a lot more to get to here as we wait. We are about 10 minutes away. For those of you just joining us on WFLA.com, WFLA's app, our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter pages, welcome. JB Buno here with you on our Stream Center. Masa Saidi, an 8 on your side investigator, as well as a former New York City prosecutor here to provide some context for us. As I understand, we might be joined here once again by Bryant Camareno, a criminal trial attorney and really an expert in these matters that we might be going back to here momentarily. If you're just joining us, what my eyes are glued on here, and the reason that I'm looking here off camera is I'm glued here to this. This is the feed from inside the courtroom now, where, again, they're going to be zooming out this camera and showing people filing in. We were told about 20 or so minutes ago that Derek Chauvin and his attorney have arrived at the courthouse. Everyone now is ready and prepared for the verdict to be read here. As Masa noted earlier, this is going to be a moment in time, a where were you moment in time, and that's going to be happening here as we're told, and we're getting alerts now in our newsroom here. This is going to be happening in about 5 to maybe 10 minutes. This could get a start in advance of 4:30 Eastern, 3:30 Central. So if you're just joining us, don't go anywhere. As soon as I see this shot become active with individuals in the courtroom here and the judge arriving here and the jurors coming in, we're of course going to take you here live to this feed. Let's get to some of the other questions and comments that are coming in here in the Facebook Live comment section. Melvin Gelinek here. Hey, Melvin, thanks a lot for joining us. Hashtag HeyJB. The jury verdict is one thing. The sentencing is another. Would the sentencing come today or tomorrow? And Masa, I'm not familiar enough with procedures in Minnesota to know how soon sentencing could come, but it might be quite a bit beyond today or tomorrow. That
would be my guess as well, JB. And I want to tell you, we're monitoring what's happening right now in Minnesota, and I can tell you that the store outside where George Floyd had his final moments, they're closing up right now. They're boarding up. They are just trying to be safe. They're just anticipating potentially the worst, including being outside of this courtroom here. That's another location where we would expect to see huge crowds.
Yeah,
this verdict.
And again, we have a lot of different feeds and angles to show you here. Let's hit the touch screen and take you here to our split screen here inside the courtroom on the left. Again, waiting for action on that left shot, on the right shot, outside the courthouse where a crowd is continuing to gather. We noted earlier that with an hour heads up, folks in Minneapolis who are just getting home from work or maybe leaving work early, it gives them ample time here to congregate outside. It's going to be quite the scene outside the courtroom, or excuse me, rather outside the courthouse when the verdict is in fact read aloud. And that's, again, in less than 10 minutes from now, as we understand it.
And I just did a little bit of research to answer that viewer's question. And apparently there's going to be a this is how they do it in Minnesota. There's going to be a pre-sentencing report detailing this ex-officer's background. That's going to be produced, and it's going to be several weeks before we find out what the sentencing will be. So today we're just going to find out if he is convicted or acquitted of these 3 charges. That is what you can expect to find out today. We will not know how much time that he's actually going to face if he is convicted. JB.
If you're joining us here on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on our app, our website, as a reminder, we are going to be here live with you afterwards here as well. This is the very beginning of what is going to be a lengthy evening, likely into the night, as far as reaction goes. We were talking about it earlier. If it's just manslaughter and the 2 murder charges are read with a verdict of not guilty, there could be quite the reaction in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we're going to be following all those developments as to what happens on the streets, whether we see peaceful demonstrations, non-peaceful demonstrations. We're going to be following it here too. So the moment that the verdict is read, we're going to hear, of course, some of the reaction from inside the courtroom. We're likely going to see the reaction from Derek Chauvin himself. We're going to stay here with you live in the WFLA Now Stream Center here, and we're going to read some of your reactions here from the comments that we have coming in. So if you're joining us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you're joining us from, we're going to have reaction here as well as soon as the verdict is read, and as soon as we are able to provide you with some more post-verdict coverage.
And even when the verdict is read, let's say that he ends up being convicted on 1 or all 3 of these charges, it's going to be up to the judge, if that happens, to decide whether he is immediately sent to jail or if he stays on bail until the sentencing happens in several weeks. So I could imagine that would be something that people would be very upset about as well. But again, we don't know what's going to happen here. We have no prediction on that.
Emily Christine, #KJB, do you think he deserves to go to jail? What would you have voted? As a reminder here, and I've seen a lot of comments like this one, it's not about what Masa or myself thinks. We're here just to provide context here as to what is unfolding here at this hour. This is more about what you think, what our viewers think here. So we're going to be focusing on the comments that have your reaction here. But one thing I'm seeing a whole lot of is Maxine Waters' name. Todd Stevens here, #KJB. When will Maxine Waters be held accountable for her actions? This is going to be an interesting post-trial saga to watch unfold. As a reminder here, folks, if you're just joining us, Maxine Waters on Saturday night said to quote-unquote get more confrontational if the Chauvin verdict does not go in their favor, basically, and if it's a not guilty verdict, and that has drawn quite a bit of outrage from individuals out there, from folks out there, and even the trial judge himself was quite unhappy with in his comments yesterday, saying he was quite unhappy and displeased with Maxine Waters and her comments here. There was a push for the motion for a mistrial because of those comments, again, which would in theory pressure the jurors into making a decision. Though, as Masa and others have noted, the jury has been sequestered here throughout this process. So that was of course the big overarching theme here, and when we're talking about Maxine Waters and her comments here. But Maxine Waters, again, being a congresswoman, her comments are all over the place as far as whether or not people agree with them or disagree with them, and it's been quite the talker on social media.
Yeah, I can tell you that the judge, as you said, was not happy with her comments, and her critics say that she was essentially inciting violence, and so I'll stay out of that political. Yeah,
but that's something that we're going to be monitoring. Without getting too much in it, we're going to be monitoring that closely to see exactly what comes of that as far as Congresswoman Waters. It could open up an
appeal if he is convicted, absolutely.
Okay, one more time. If you're just joining us, we're engaging a new digital audience once again. JB Buno, Masa Saidi here with you in the WFLA Now Stream Center here. Thank you to Todd for that comment. Let's see if we can hit the touch screen here and if we can put that comment away.
And if we can kind of set the scene. So right now, Derek Chauvin is in the courthouse. We can tell you that he has arrived there. He is with his attorney. We know that in the surrounding area in Minneapolis, we know that some businesses are starting to board up in preparation for what could come, regardless of what this verdict is. We're seeing that crowd outside the courthouse, as you can see, is growing larger. There's a sign, Black Lives Matter. And as you said, JB, this has just grown. This crowd has just grown before our eyes. We are minutes away from
perhaps seconds. Yeah. I mean, we're that close now. The time 4:29
4:29.
Eastern.
That's right. I did not know it was 4:29.
They said 4:30 would be the approximate time. So we're now permanently fixated here on the left side of your screen. It looks like a still image here, folks, on the left side of your screen, but that is a live video feed. In fact, let's just take a moment here. Masa and I we're going to mute our microphones here for just a second and just bring up the courtroom audio here from the left side of your screen. Let's just listen in and if we can hear anybody inside the courtroom itself. So no audio from inside the courtroom at this time, but I'm going to leave that audio channel open here so that the moment that we hear some activity here from inside the courtroom, we can go to it live. Now let's take you to the audio from the right side of your screen and listen from outside the courthouse.
And we know we all witnessed Brother George Floyd. He's murdered, right? Say murder! Say murder! He's murdered by Shovin, and today he's going to be held accountable. When Shovin is held accountable, he will be the first white officer in the history, in modern day history of Minnesota, to be held accountable for murdering a black man. Let's cheer for that. Come on! This system owes us that much. Right, bro? This system owes us that much because we recognize that that's not even completely justice. Real justice would be if Brother George Floyd was still alive tonight. Amen? And he's not. So say his name! George Floyd! 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 Black Lives Matter! 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 Black Lives Matter!
So that's a little bit of the sound from outside the courthouse. As Masa noted, as I noted, that crowd is getting bigger by the second. More and more people. And as I understand it, too, we're being told that a chopper is now flying over to the scene to provide us with an idea as to just how big this group is outside of the courtroom itself. Let's, again, welcome you back in here into the WFLA Now Stream Center. JB Buno alongside 8 on your side investigator Masa Saidi, a former New York City prosecutor here. We are live on WFLA.com, WFLA's app, our website, our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube here for a moment in history. If you're just tuning in now, you haven't missed a thing. Again, we're going to go here live split screen and show you the left side of your screen is the live courtroom feed. We've opened up that audio channel, so the moment that we hear them welcome folks back into the courtroom here, you'll be able to hear it from home here. And then as soon as the verdict is read and as soon as we see that the proceedings are done for today, we're going to have your reaction here. We're going to be staying here with you live in the WFLA Now Stream Center here to read off some of your comments and get some of your reaction here. Also show you some of the feeds from outside of the courthouse itself to show you what the reaction is looking at like in real time from folks in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So a lot of different ways this could go, Masa, in the next few minutes.
Yeah, a lot of different ways, and President Biden is weighing in on this. Apparently, he did call the family of George Floyd yesterday, just showing his support for everything that's happened, and he did tell reporters today that the evidence against this police officer is, quote, overwhelming, and that he's praying for, quote, the right verdict. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here, JB. Again, this police officer is former ex-police officer waiting to hear his fate. Second-degree murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, potentially facing years behind bars. And within seconds, we're going to know what that jury decided after about 3 weeks of listening to testimony and deliberating for about 10 hours, JB.
And make no mistake about it, folks. I've seen just in our Facebook Live comment section, folks joining us from around the world. This is now an international story here with with really what is the standard here as far as policing in America. Is that video considered egregious enough to be considered manslaughter? Is it egregious enough to be considered third-degree murder? Is it egregious enough to be considered second-degree murder? Or is it just the appropriate use of force? We've heard so many times, Masa, excessive force versus appropriate use of force, and really that where the line is and where the bar is about to be set here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've heard so much expert witness testimony here throughout these proceedings in this trial here, and now we're going to hear what the jury has to say after hearing all of it over the last several weeks.
And just to be clear, these 3 charges, none of these charges require an intent to kill, any sort of premeditation. The second-degree murder does not require that. None of these charges require that. This can be all unintentional. So again, the prosecutors argued that Mr. Floyd was being assaulted when he died. So that would be the felony murder charge, the second-degree murder, the most serious charge that this police officer is facing today, JB.
And we're again seconds away, as we understand it. Derek Chauvin, his attorney, have arrived here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. They have arrived here at the courthouse itself, and we're being told that we're seconds away from something happening here on the left side of your screen, the live courtroom feed. That's the same feed that's going out really to the media. It's the feed that has been set up for the world, really, the public at large, but really the world to witness what has unfolded here so that we could hear all the witness testimony, so that we could hear all the arguments by the attorneys, so that we could hear opening arguments and closing arguments. And Masa, you know, this is something that has been unfolding in front of the public's view, and that is something in and of itself that creates even more of a sense of fascination behind this trial, because really everyone at home has been able to say in a certain way from afar that they were serving in a jury-like capacity. If you listened to every moment from inside of this courtroom, from the very moment it began to the very moment that here we are here today, then you're hearing the same thing that the jury is hearing there in that courtroom, and you can form your own educated opinion. I think that there are a lot of folks, though, that hear me say that and say, oh, you know, hearing all of the witness testimony, you know, puts you in a position to basically tell us what you think legally here on these 3 charges, whether or not they're guilty or not guilty. But really, I think that there are a lot of folks that would probably think all it takes is watching the video, seeing the video in and of itself, to determine whether or not you think that that was right or wrong, that there's a sense of morality that comes in here when it comes to Derek Chauvin's actions that day last year on the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota. But we also have to remember here something that is so crucially and vitally important, is whether or not this pertains, it's about the law. This is about these 3 charges. It's about whether or not he is guilty of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, or second-degree manslaughter. It doesn't really come down to whether or not what you saw in the video is right or wrong. It's whether or not he is found guilty of one of these 3 charges in the estimation of the jury. We're about to find that out here really any second.
Yeah, that's right, JB. And I think certainly the strongest piece of evidence these prosecutors had was that video that was 8 minutes and some seconds long with this ex-officer's knee on George Floyd's neck. Yes, people have been listening to that testimony for the past 3 weeks, but certainly that video is going to be the basis of their decision, likely. So we are just seconds away, potentially, of finding out the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial.
And I've just been told here that we're getting a new feed here. So let's take you now to outside the courthouse, excuse me. But we're going to take you now to aerials. That chopper that I mentioned here a short time ago has arrived. And now you can see here on the right side of your screen, the crowd that has gathered here outside of the courthouse. So Masa, you can see here the crowd is beginning to grow.
And yeah, the crowd is beginning to grow, and I would have actually expected a larger crowd than that, JB. So I wonder if that's actually a fairly small crowd. Would you say about 100 people there?
Yeah, well, I think it looks like a couple of hundred here. Let's take you back here to the ground, and folks, we just want to listen in here for just a moment, listen into some of the action going on here on the ground in Minneapolis.
this is a no carry now? No open carry in Minneapolis now? It was Michigan that you could walk in the state capitol with an AR. Yeah. That's all those guys did, and they were legal. Yeah. See, that's my goal is to never be on it. Yeah. Right. Turn to your right. Yeah. Look right there. That's Eric. Hey. Yeah. No, there's not. My goal is to never be on it. They gotta be.
And we're back here with you live in the WFLA Now Stream Center here again, being told that those who are permitted to be in the courtroom for this moment in history, they are now, of course, being taken into the courtroom. The final ones to be entering the courtroom will be the judge himself, if I remember correctly, the judge being Peter Cahill, if I remember that correctly, and I'll triple check that here in just a moment. Let's make sure I have that now.
And I can tell you that the
Yes, Peter Cahill.
courthouse where the trial is being held is surrounded by fencing, concrete barriers. There's National Guard troops there on the ground right now. There are National Guard troops in cities across America right now in anticipation for this verdict that we are about to hear. We know businesses are being boarded up across the country. Police ready to try to ensure that the crowds, the protesters, remain peaceful regardless of what this verdict is.
All right, and let's welcome back in once again Bryant Camerano joining us here, criminal trial attorney here in the Tampa Bay area. Bryant, thanks again for joining us. And again, as we engage a new digital audience here, awaiting for this verdict to be read here, Bryant, we're getting closer now to this moment in history. Your thoughts here as we're about to hear the verdict read aloud in Minneapolis?
You know, one of the hardest part of being a trial lawyer, defense or prosecution, is the waiting period. And there's so much anxiety built up. I can just tell you right now, everyone, the court personnel, the lawyers, the judges, the bailiffs, everyone, the public at large. Just a very stressful situation, and including the victims' families as well as the defendants. So this anxiety that you see, the tension, you can almost feel it just from looking at these images outside, just the tension. So imagine what it's like for people inside. The defendant, you know, the victim's family. It's just this is probably the hardest part of being a trial.
What's his name?
Bryant Camerano joining us here live on WFLA Now with 8 on Your Side investigator Masa Saidi and myself, Masa.
Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us. All of your experience is so vital in this moment. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience? I know that you have been involved in countless trials. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience before telling us what, you know, prosecutors and defense attorneys, what they're feeling in this moment as all of this weeks of work comes to an end as they wait for this jury?
Sure. As far as my personal background, yeah, I was a prosecutor for about 10 years. I spent 5 years as a state prosecutor, and then I followed that with 5 years as a federal prosecutor. And so from a prosecutor's perspective, these prosecutors did an excellent job putting the case together, rounding up the witnesses, outlining the witnesses in the order in which they presented them, knowing that there was a strategy behind that, and presenting that theory of prosecution to the jurors. So from a prosecutorial standpoint, I think they did a phenomenal job. It's an exhausting process because the weight is on your shoulders to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And then for the last 17 years, I've been a defense attorney, and it's just the burden. It's a different type of burden. We don't have to prove innocence, but we have to deflect from the obvious, deflect from the evidence, and try to convince that jury that there are bits and pieces of doubt in the state's case. So it's a different type of burden, but a no less stressful one from that perspective.
And Brian, would you say the central question in this case is whether excessive force was used or whether the officer acted reasonable in this situation? Can you just, as we wait for this historic moment, what is the central question this jury is about to answer for us?
I think that, again, I said earlier, the fact that they didn't deliberate as long as I thought that it would have, it seems to suggest that I think they all came to agreement, and I may be completely wrong, that this was excessive. The issue is, again, did Mr. Chauvin act with a depraved mind? Was he just grossly negligent? So I think there's no question in that juror's mind that it was excessive. And then, again, I may be wrong, the verdict may bear out differently. So I think that was a no-brainer. It was definitely excessive. Now the issue is, to what degree was it just culpable negligence? Was it, depraved mind, which is the second-degree murder, or was it even worse? And I think that that's what's going on in the juror's mind. I don't think there's any doubt that they found that it's definitely excessive.
Again, welcoming in here, Brian Camerano here, our criminal trial expert this evening here as we await the verdict. At the moment that there's action here in the center of your screen, the seal, the camera there that is feeding the live feed from the courtroom. As soon as you see action, there's action, and we, of course, will be listening in here for a verdict in all of the proceedings here from Judge Peter Cahill. Again, you can use hashtag, any of the hashtags on your screen. Hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyMasa, hashtag HeyBrian to ask a question while we await some action taking place here in the Minneapolis courtroom. And the one that we have here comes in from Alex Sedano here in the Facebook Live comment section. It's for you, Brian. It's hashtag HeyBrian. Could Chauvin appeal?
Absolutely. A lot of people ask, why did they take this to trial? What's the point of taking it to trial when there could have been a plea bargain? And so what I tell my clients, if you take an offer, if that offer is 20, 30 years, you're stuck with that plea for the rest of that sentence. You cannot appeal. You can maybe attack your lawyer's effectiveness, if you will. But when you take a matter to trial and you raise objections during the course of the trial, like the counsel did in this case, then that's something that you can hold on to at the end, hopefully in terms of an appeal. So not only is he going to appeal matters that came up before the trial, matters that came up during the trial, and then possibly matters that come after the trial. For example, sentencing, the issue of Maxine Waters' comment. While maybe not enough to cause a mistrial, is that enough for an appellate court to look at it and take pause and say, you know what, maybe that verdict or that comment affected the verdict. So absolutely, he'll have the absolute right to appeal. That's why a lot of lawyers take their matters to trial to preserve appellate issues and hopefully come back on appeal, as opposed to just a straight plea. You've seen that in Bill Cosby's case. Why did he take it to trial? Well, at his age, any plea deal would have been a death sentence. So take it to trial and then come back on appeal, at least hopefully. And of course, Cosby, like my understanding is he did not win any appeals, but at least you hold on out as a way of hope.
And I think, everyone that is tuning into this feed right now, there's really two big questions for people. If this ex-officer ends up being convicted, my understanding is the sentencing is not going to happen for several weeks, and the judge could allow him to go back home on bail as he awaits sentencing. So my first question to you is going to be, do you think the judge would do that given the climate that we have right now? And then I know that sentencing is very complicated and is different everywhere. But would the judge ordinarily, let's say he's convicted of second-degree murder, although the max is 40 years, the sentencing guidelines say about 11 to 15 years. Could you speak to that? Does the judge have to follow that? Does that have to be followed? Or does he have discretion? Could he sentence him to 40 years if he is convicted of second-degree murder?
So as the first question, could he let him out? Sure, he could. It's not likely that the judge would. The presumption of innocence no longer applies. Now that he's been convicted, you're presumed innocent, pre-trial, pre-verdict, so you have the right to reasonable bail. But once you're convicted, that right no longer exists. In some jurisdictions, you have to show a really good solid basis to appeal, that you're likely to win on appeal. Then the judge might consider a bond in that situation. But it's not likely he would do that here. Now, as far as the sentencing range, I commented earlier that there is a presumptive range, a sentencing range. And the intent behind that in most jurisdictions is to make sure there's parity, to make sure it's equal amongst all defendants, regardless of race, color, religion, whoever you are. You're going to start with the same baseline and get sentenced the same way. So there won't be any disparity. Can the judge increase or go above the guidelines? Absolutely. Could he go below? Absolutely. But typically, state law requires the judge to give a written, specific reason as to why he's going to go above the recommendation or below. So the judge does have that discretion. But keep in mind, if for some reason the judge goes below the recommendation, then the state can appeal. They can come back and say this was an illegal sentence, or at least the disparity, the downward departure, if you will, was unjustified, illegal, and then they can ask the judge to the appellate court to reverse it. Same thing. If the judge goes above the recommended guideline, then the defense could appeal that, say that the judge exceeded his discretion. One of the many reasons why, again, you take a matter to trial to preserve all those appellate issues and hopefully come back at some point in the process on appeal.
Again, if you're just joining us here on WFLA.com, the WFLA app, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, we're split screen here on WFLA Now. Left side is a live feed from the courtroom here. Any second now, we're going to see that camera zoom out from this seal to reveal the entirety of the courtroom here. Judge Peter Cahill will walk in the jurors with the deputy that has had them sequestered now at that hotel room that they stayed in overnight. They will be ushered in by that deputy. We're going to, of course, we're not going to see the jury. The jury is going to have their verdict here read aloud. And then, of course, we're going to see the reaction from Derek Chauvin. That is coming your way here on the left side. The right side is aerial coverage of the group of bystanders, the individuals here that have gathered outside of the courthouse here to be there for that moment in history when the verdict is read here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have a lot of questions and comments coming in here. If you're just joining us here in the WFLA Now Stream Center, you know how this works. Hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyMasa, or hashtag HeyBryant, and we'll take some of the questions that we have coming in here in the Facebook Live comment section, including this one here, Masa. Kush Cartel Amp, hashtag HeyJB. Do any of the charges carry the death penalty?
The charges do not carry the death penalty, but I want to give a little bit of insight about what's happening right now on the ground. As soon as that alert went out that a verdict would be read, really at any second, we are expecting that verdict. People started to really descend to the courthouse, and we are seeing that crowd grow larger by the second. Family members of George Floyd commenting to reporters on the scene there, saying that they are confident that a second-degree murder charge is going to be reached in this case. So much on the line right now, JB. National Guard troops, about 3,000 on scene there, about an additional, throughout the city, not just at that location, about an additional 1,000 law enforcement personnel on the scene, businesses boarding up, people just praying that whatever happens, there's going to be peace in that city and cities across America tonight. We know we're about to see either celebration or anger.
Let's take it to a new feed here, and let's listen into what we have here on the ground.
George, don't get hit! And I'll leave you with this. Justice is living in a world where George Floyd was never murdered. Justice is living in a world where Derek Chauvin understood white supremacy from the age of 5. Justice is a lot of these folks here, a lot of these white faces, having conversations with their family members, with their counterparts, with their co-workers. So work is going to need to continue going forward.
As we see the group here outside of the courthouse here in Minneapolis continue to grow, we're here live with that feed on the left side of your screen here. Momentarily going to hear the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, excuse me. Let's get to the next question that we have coming in here, folks, in the Facebook Live comment section here. It's for you, Bryant, and Bryant Camareno joining us here, criminal trial attorney here in the Tampa Bay area. Jacob Copeland is asking, hashtag, hey, Bryant, if not guilty, could the state pick this back up, or is that considered double jeopardy?
Yeah, I see one of the other commentators nodding or shaking her head. No, that's correct. A double jeopardy would preclude that from happening. But what could happen is the feds could take a look at this case, like they did with the Rodney King. If anyone's old enough to remember the Rodney King case, acquitted at the state level, but the feds picked it up and then charged them federally. So if there's any showing of civil rights violation from that perspective, so even though there may be an outright acquittal at the state level, which I think is unlikely, the feds could take it and make it a federal case.
And very interesting there, because we know that President Biden has done something kind of unusual. He's weighed in on this case, Bryant, and he has, said that he thinks that the evidence in this case
that's a comment that we actually have coming in here right now, you guys. Let's get to this comment here from Kristen Hopkins. Here it's hashtag hey Bryant. Once it animates here on screen here, folks, you'll be able to see that comment here played back from our Facebook Live comment section. Let's see that here. And there it is. Kristen Hopkins, hashtag Hey Bryant, could President Biden's comments regarding Chauvin's guilt affect any future appeals he might make?
You know, not likely. I think that's not likely because it's sort of like the Maxine Waters case. I doubt it. The issue is going to be whether or not that comment had an impact on the jury. They were sequestered. I don't think they heard Maxine Waters' comments. I don't think they heard President Biden's comments. So it's not likely that that'll have any impact on the, on the verdict or the impact of or post-conviction, any appellate issues. So not likely, unless it has some impact on the judge's decision-making, which how do you prove that? So no, I think everyone has a First Amendment right to speak their mind, whether you like it or not. And I don't think any of that will affect the outcome of this trial or at this stage or at the appellate level.
Right. I understand that you're going to step away here for just a second. We'll be coming back to you in about 2 minutes time. Again, Bryant Camerano joining us here from the Tampa Bay area, criminal trial attorney here joining us in the Tampa Bay area. Again, let's listen in here, folks, live from the ground outside the courthouse here in Minneapolis. Back in 30 seconds.
They feel necessary. However, they feel necessary because justice is not just convicting Shovin. It's making sure that another George Floyd doesn't happen. And in the midst of this trial, there's been Dalal Eid. There has been Dante Wright. There have been numerous names that I've had to learn from across this nation. All while the police have been under the spotlight. They don't care. They don't care. They showed you time. They showed us time and time again. They do not care. Justice. If we're talking about justice, what does justice look like to you? What does justice look like to you? For me, justice will look like having a system in place that protects my black life like they're protecting this courthouse right now. How about when my life is under attack, they send in the National Guard to protect me? How about white folks on Facebook and Twitter and wherever they post? When my life is under attack, how about they talk about my life the same way they talk about the Dollar Tree getting looted? Because all them buildings, all that property can be brought back. Their money's not going nowhere. The money's still there. My life, when it's taken, it's not coming back. George Floyd will never take another breath on this planet again. George Floyd will never take another breath on this planet again. And until these systems are uprooted and recreated with everyone's best interest in mind, we are going to stay out in these.
As we're listening here from outside of the courtroom, or outside of the courthouse here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, seconds away, as we understand it, from there being action inside the courtroom there on the left side of your screen. That's the live pool feed out to the world to show us what the verdict is going to be in the Derek Chauvin trial, again, in the death of George Floyd last year. Again, JB Buno, Masa Saidi here with you live in the WFLA Now Stream Center. 8 on Your Side investigator, former New York City prosecutor here with us here. And then joining us via Zoom here as well, Bryant Camerano here is joining us from his home here in the Tampa Bay area. Brian, thanks again for joining us. Let's get to this next question here, you guys. This is a very, very poignant question coming in from Blaze Barrett. Hashtag HeyJB, will the jurors be protected after the trial is done? And let's remind our viewers here, first and foremost, how they're protected is that they are kept anonymous. Their names are not public. So, but still a great question here. And Masa being a former New York City prosecutor, and Bryant, you being a criminal trial attorney, here in the Tampa Bay area for so long, perhaps you can both answer this question now. The jurors now have to live with the fallout from this going forward now after the verdict is read.
And I know that was a lot of reason that some people did not want to be on this jury pool, just afraid that somehow their identity would at some point be released. So that certainly is a fear that some people had going into this. But I just want to mention, JB, that it's 3:57 p.m. local time, and we were expecting to hear this verdict by 4 p.m. So literally just minutes from the window that we were told that we were going to hear this verdict. But Bryant, did you have anything else to add about what steps the court would take to protect this jury?
That's a tough one. They remained anonymous. They were sequestered. At some point, I know that with proper motions, if the court can show that there was a specific need to reveal the names. I know the press could at some point try to access their names, but so other than that, I'm not aware of any type of extra security, law enforcement security. I'm not aware of anything like in any jurisdiction in this country. So it really is just going to be a matter of them remaining anonymous, and hopefully no one will leak their names. But I've seen some members of the press access, members of the jury or even lawyers for the proper finding. Difficult. But other than that, I'm not aware of anything that will protect them. But I honestly don't think they're going to need any protection. I think the verdict will be will satisfied, if you will, the desire for justice from every perspective.
We got another couple of questions coming in here. Let's get to this one really quickly, and this one's for you, Masa, from Chi Williams here, hashtag Hey Masa. Are we able to know the demographic of the jury? You read this earlier. There is, a variety of representation here on this particular jury.
Yep, that's right. So there are 4 white women and 2 white men, 3 black men and 1 black woman. So 6 people who identify as white, 4 people who identify as I'm centering myself out. 4 people who identify as black and 2 people who identify as multiracial. So we know that these people, wide variety of ages from 20 to 60, both races are represented in this jury. So I would say that I'll let Brian, if he has anything else to add, but this is a diverse jury pool, wouldn't you say, Brian?
Yeah, Brian. I mean, the diversity of the jury, how important is that as far as a factor here?
Well, I think it's very important. But different regions, though. For example, if I'm Mr. Chauvin and I'm a white male, I'm assuming he's white. Am I going to appreciate that there's that much diversity? I don't know. I don't know what's going on in his mind. Am I going to appreciate there's people that represent my race, if you will? Then yeah, I think you'll appreciate that. But I think from everyone's perspective, the people that are listening to this, this newscast right now, who want to know the diversity, I think that is important because it sends a message that these group of people from all these different backgrounds, races, religions, came to a unanimous conclusion. So I think it'll send a positive message. So again, Mr. Chauvin may not appreciate that there was a mixture. I don't know, what's going on in his mind. But overall, the impact is, look, they came together. They came as 12 strangers that came together and they agreed on a unanimous verdict. So I think that will definitely resonate and send a positive message. So I think it is important that there is that diversity that really lacks in so many trials, especially if you're a person of color. Sometimes it's lacking. Here we have that. And so I think it's a positive thing that you have that much diversity. And again, from Mr. Chauvin's perspective, who knows how he felt, what his lawyer thought. But at least it was somewhat inclusive, and I don't think he can ever complain that there was no representation. I think it was pretty broad, and I don't think that would be a basis for him to appeal.
Next question that we have, again, if you want to ask a question and be featured here on our stream here, we're trying to spotlight some great questions, maybe some very insightful comments here that are, of course, non-inflammatory, that are appropriate for air. You can use any of the hashtags that we have here on our screen, hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyMasa, and hashtag HeyBrian are the ones that we have currently here on WFLA Now. Kaizan Jacobs, hashtag HeyJB, since Chauvin invoked the Fifth Amendment, does that make him guilty of the crime? I think first and foremost, we can say unequivocally no, that the answer to that question is no, it does not make him guilty of the crime. But invoking your Fifth Amendment right to not testify in your own trial, I'd like to hear from both of you on this. Brian, were you surprised by that decision? I would probably say you weren't surprised here, as we again go split screen here and show you left side of your screen inside the courtroom, right side outside the courthouse. What did you make of the decision to invoke the Fifth Amendment?
I think a lot of people expected that. We can always second guess. If it goes wrong for him, I'm sure he'll reflect at some point and say, maybe I should have testified. But I don't think you can ever go wrong not testifying. The only time I think you do need to testify is if your testimony fills in a gap or is essential to prove, for example, in affirmative defense, entrapment, self-defense. If you don't testify or take the stand and say, hey, I shot him because he shot at me, then that's lacking. But this was not that type of case. I think the video spoke for itself. And I think anything he would have said could have really maybe impacted him negatively. He may not have been a great speaker. The jury may have been turned off by him. So I don't think I expect that he was going to remain silent. And no, it's not an admission of guilt. In fact, the jurors are told that.
Masa, a trial of this magnitude to invoke the Fifth Amendment, I mean, not terribly surprising, right?
Yeah, absolutely not surprising, but to just offer kind of a different, I completely agree with everything that Brian just said, but you could argue that video was so powerful, so put him in a negative light, that you can clearly make that argument. So Wouldn't there have been an argument made in this case, Brian, that he should try to get out there and talk about why he did what he did, restraining this gentleman, like explaining whatever his viewpoint, that I didn't know that he was in trouble? Or couldn't you make an argument because the video is so powerful?
I agree. The problem with that is, and I agree 100%. One, we don't know what his demeanor is like. How does he come across? Most of us who cross-examine police officers on the stand, most of them come across as arrogant, cocky, and some jurors are turned off by that. So I don't know if he would have come across like that. And secondly, there was a videotape of him in the police car after Mr. Floyd had already passed and he had been taken away, and you could tell he was overly anxious as he was talking. I think the supervisor, I think that he would have been subject to impeachment as to that. Why didn't you say what you're saying today at the time? And then cross-examination. These prosecutors are so effective in cross-examination that who knows? I think his lawyer may have said, listen, I've been up against these guys. They're going to cross-examine you. They're going to make you look horrible. So I agree. Sometimes there is a need to get your client on the stand, but at a risk of something worse happening.
Can I ask a
okay, and we now have a feed from inside the courtroom. Let's go live now to the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial.
All rise for the jury. All right, please be seated. Members of the jury, I understand you have a verdict. Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, Count 1. Court File Number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by jury foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer questions and to advise you further. So, all rise for the jury. All right, be seated. With the guilty verdicts returned, we're going to have Blakely, you may file a written argument as to Blakely factors within 1 week. The court will issue findings on the Blakely factors, the factual findings, 1 week after that. We'll order a PSI immediately returnable in 4 weeks. And we will also have a briefing on, after you get the PSI, 6 weeks from now, and then 8 weeks from now we will have sentencing. We'll get you the exact dates in a scheduling order. Is there a motion on behalf of the state?
The state would move to have the court revoke the defendant's bail and remand him into custody pending sentencing.
Bail is revoked, bond is discharged, and the defendant is remanded to the custody of the Hennepin County Sheriff. Anything further?
All
right. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Second-degree unintentional murder, guilty. Third-degree murder, guilty. Second-degree manslaughter, guilty. Derek Chauvin found guilty on all counts, on all charges in the death of George Floyd last year. Let's listen in now to the reaction outside the courthouse in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Finally breathe like somebody can finally take their knee off of our neck. DJ Wilder.
What does it mean to be here at this spot right now?
When they come to us, we can just keep it up and talking. It's transcendent. Yes. To be here when they announce that verdict, to know that that man took his last breath right there.
Pretty emotional, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you feeling in this moment? You're overcome with emotion. What are you feeling?
I'm just so grateful. I'm just so grateful because it's been so much anxiety. So I'm so grateful for this.
You've been following this for the last year now, and the moment that everyone's been waiting for, at least everyone that's out here that's been waiting for, is here.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's this process been like for you over the last year?
Just so stressful. I live an hour from here, and I've just been in it from afar, and I just wanted to be here today. And I'm just so happy that I know we have a long way to go, but we needed this today. Is
this the start of a new beginning, you would say, for this city and this country?
It has to be. This entire world. Yeah. It has to be. We got to do this.
What was your name?
Melanie.
Melanie, can you spell that for me?
Melanie.
And last name?
Moonstone. Moonstone.
Thank you, Melanie. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Where are you guys from?
Care 11.
Okay.
Yeah. Take care. Be safe.
Maybe later?
Yes.
Thank you.
As again, we have some of the reaction here from outside of the courthouse after Derek Chauvin, ex-Minneapolis police officer, found guilty on all charges. Second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. Not much of an expression on Chauvin's face as the verdict was read. We're back here live in the WFN Now Stream Center. We want to hear from you folks. Hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyMasa, hashtag HeyBryant. We're going to get Bryant's quick reaction. We have a lot of guests to get to here to hear just some of the reaction here in Florida, here on the ground in Tampa Bay, as to this verdict, this historic verdict here read aloud here in this Minneapolis courtroom. Bryant, let's start with you. Your reaction. You had a gut feeling, as you described earlier, that it was going to be guilty. Here we have guilty on all 3 charges. Your reaction as we go here, split screen here momentarily. What do you think?
You know, from a legal perspective, it's interesting how this jurisdiction can do all 3 counts. I don't, here in Florida, for example, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. I was somewhat surprised with the second-degree murder, you know, the felony murder application. I definitely knew the culpable negligence, and you know, a little unsure about the depraved mind. Or I should say, I was a little bit in between. The first one surprised me, the second-degree murder, felony murder rule. So that surprised me. But you know, at least I knew he was going to be convicted of something. And as the little spectator pointed out, you know, I think the community needed closure, whether it was one of these or all of these. And I think at this point we'll get that. They'll get that closure. Now, the appellate court may disagree and say, you know what, there's no felony murder here. But I don't know that Minnesota law as well as they do Florida law. It's a very interesting verdict, but I definitely knew they were going to find him guilty of the second-degree manslaughter.
Let's talk really quickly, folks, here again, as we're looking here at some of the feeds that we have coming in here from around Minneapolis, Minnesota, especially outside the courtroom here, outside of the courthouse. Let's bring Bryant and Masa here back in as we monitor all of these feeds. Let's talk now about the big question that we're seeing here on the Facebook Live, YouTube Live comment sections is now what happens as far as sentencing. Masa, you were looking up here a short time ago what the sentencing procedures are in Minnesota, and also we can answer also a little bit about how much time Chauvin could be spending here in prison.
Yeah, so first and foremost, the judge just decided after the state put in the motion to revoke bail in this case. So Derek Chauvin will remain in jail until sentencing. So right now, the next steps, they're going to prepare a pre-sentencing report. The sentencing in about 6 weeks from today, they're going to have a briefing. 8 weeks from today, sentencing we will learn how much time this ex-officer that has now been convicted on 2 murder charges will face in prison, JB. And again, I just cannot say enough, you know, our legal system, and Brian can talk more about this, doesn't always hold police officers accountable when a death happens like this. So this is, you know, a huge moment that this ex-officer was just found guilty of 2 murder charges. And it kind of speaks to the case in that video and the impact that George Floyd's death has had on this country.
Brian, yeah, we're going to have to transition to the next guest here momentarily, so I'm going to ask you, sir, for your kind of final thoughts here as we kind of wrap up.
Yeah, listen, I'm glad that there's closure. I'm glad the community will hopefully start the healing process. More importantly, though, this was an indictment against bad cops, not good cops, and hopefully this will send a message to cops all over the country. Learn from what happened here. So I'm glad that it's over, at least this part's over, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
All right, Bryant Camerino joining us here in the Tampa Bay area. Bryant, thanks so much for your time. Let's get now back to 8 on your sides, Masa Saidi. Masa, now where do we go from here? I'm going to give you just kind of a moment here before we say farewell to you. We have other guests to get to here for your reaction, but where do we go from here?
Well, Derek Chauvin is now, as I mentioned before, he is now going to remain in custody until his sentencing. There will be an appeal, as there always is in cases like this. The sentencing is going to happen 8 weeks from today. He was convicted on all 3 counts, second-degree murder. Max is 40 years. Somebody in that situation is about 12 years what they ordinarily get. We're going to have to wait 8 weeks, 2 months to find out what actually happens. Third-degree murder, again, could get up to 25, but it's more like 10 with someone with no prior convictions like this ex-officer. And the second-degree manslaughter, again, ordinarily with his priors, which is no priors at all, about 4 years. So in about 8 weeks, JB, we're going to learn how much time that he's going to face. But I can tell you, it looks like a celebration is happening on those streets right now. People relieved, people that believed that this was murder, relieved at this verdict.
Masa Saidi, 8 on your side, investigator, joining us here as we're again split screen here on WFLA Now, just showing you some of the reactions going on here in the WFLA Now Stream Center. I want to bring in our next guest here, and that being Florida State Senator Darrell Rouson, joining us here from the Tampa Bay area. And Darrell, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join us here. Your reaction here to the verdict, Chauvin found guilty on all charges. And Senator, I think that you'll need to unmute your microphone so we can bring your audio in here via Zoom.
How's that?
Yep, we got you.
Yeah, I'm sorry that it took protests. I'm sorry that it took a life to usher in this new era of criminal justice reform. But justice is served. Certainly a verdict will not bring a life back, but it can serve as an example to other police officers. And that's what's really important here. It took other officers taking the stand to expose one of their own bad conduct, and we were successful in getting a good verdict.
As we're looking here, Daryl, again, live here from the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota, there was so much concern out there in regards to what the reaction was going to be on the streets of Minneapolis, on the streets of elsewhere in Minnesota, on the streets of Chicago, maybe here in Florida, New York, California, Oregon, all these places across the country. There was preparations put into place for the reaction. What is the reaction, do you think, here across the country from the folks, especially here in Minneapolis, Minnesota?
Well, the reaction should be a tinge of sadness sprinkled with some opportunity for greatness. Certainly, we've been here before. We've listened to verdicts and been disappointed in the findings of the jurors. But in this one, justice is served by these verdicts. And I'm pleased that the prosecution put on a powerful and overwhelming case against Derek Chauvin. But hopefully this will serve as a deterrent to other police officers. Certainly we should have a duty to intervene. When a good officer sees a bad officer engaging in misconduct, there ought to be some responsibility for him to step up and not wait to testify at a trial.
State Senator Darrell Roussan joining us here on WFLA Now. One of the things we want to ask you, State Senator, in particular is, you know, just this week here in the state of Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis signing into law the anti-riot bill, talking about HB1. Timing, of course, of note, because here we have the Chauvin verdict here this Tuesday evening, and it was just yesterday that Governor Ron DeSantis signed that bill into law right here in the Tampa Bay area in Polk County alongside several sheriffs, including the sheriff from Pinellas County, Sheriff Bob Gualtieri. What's your reaction to that bill here in the state of Florida, the anti-riot bill, HB1?
Well, it was an unnecessary bill, and the bill will not stop true protesters who are protesting against systemic and institutionalized discrimination.
And so clearly in opposition of the bill, what do you think that it does as far as demonstrations going forward here in Florida? There's been topics such as questions asked about the enforceability of HB1. What's your opinion on it?
Well, I believe it's unconstitutional. It's an attack on First Amendment rights. People should be able to protest. After all, this country was born of protest.
State Senator Darrell Roussan joining us here, everybody, live on WFLA Now as we look here at the center of your screen. Darrell, let me ask you this. The moment that verdict is read, I'm sure you're at home watching on TV, you know, watching like really millions of Americans watching this moment unfold. I will tell you in all honesty that my heart rate, you know, was up a little bit. You know, there's just so much anticipation over what it's going to be, whether or not there's going to be a guilty verdict read on one of the two murder charges, if it was just going to be manslaughter or not guilty on all three. The moment that verdict is read, you hear guilty, 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 and then you hear from each one of the jurors saying that they confirmed that was in fact their verdict. What's going through your mind, not even perhaps as a state senator here in the state of Florida, but just as an American, as all of us were watching that moment? What was going through your mind and what were you feeling?
Well, as a black man born of experiences, life experiences in America, particularly Florida, I felt a sense of relief. We've been here before. We've been disappointed by verdicts before. But this one rang true, and the prosecution did an excellent job with the evidence, including 5 doctors who all testified that it was positional asphyxiation that led to his death, the knee on the neck. Now people can feel some relief that justice has been served.
And as far as the impact here, sir, in the state of Florida and the impact here really with your constituents, Pinellas, Hillsborough counties, talking of course about, St. Petersburg. When we're talking about what you can now, the conversations that you can have both with your constituents, the conversations that you can have with the police, with law enforcement agencies such as the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office or St. Pete Police or Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. Where does the conversation go now forward here in the state of Florida and here in the Tampa Bay area now that this is not necessarily, I don't want to say in the rearview mirror yet. We're still, as a country, I think, coming off the heels of what George Floyd's death meant to all of us and what it meant as far as a reaction here from both a law enforcement perspective, from a perspective as far as being black in America. What are the conversations that take place now going forward to ensure that we don't have more situations like George Floyd, that we don't have more situations like Breonna Taylor, that we don't have more situations like Elijah McClain or Ahmaud Arbery? What are the conversations that you're going to be having here in the Tampa Bay area?
Well, the conversation started after George Floyd's death and got louder and louder until this verdict. They will continue until we issue in this new era of criminal justice reform, standards that we can expect our officers to live by and perform by, training that we can offer them for implicit bias and better training on use of force, community awareness, and we must continue along those paths.
And before we let you go, any other final thoughts that you have, sir, while we have this audience here? We have a large audience watching on our app, our website, our social media platforms. What do you want them to hear from you, sir, before we introduce our new guest?
Again, no verdict can bring a life back, but it can serve justice. And I believe justice has been served. And we should continue to move forward with all deliberate speed in getting real reform at all levels, systemic and individually by each individual officer. We support good policing, but good police officers don't want a bad officer standing next to them.
State Senator Darryl Rouson joining us here on WFLA Now. Sir, thank you so much for your time. We're being told now that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is speaking. Let's listen in here live.
We thank God. They are people of faith. They conveyed that to me on the phone, but they've conveyed it all along. So as it'll be 8 weeks, according to what the judge said on this, before we know the sentencing, but that's part of the justice of it all as well. Mr. Clyburn has been a solid, steady force for all of us here, because this was a traumatic. My little granddaughter, who just turned 12, she said, "Why is it taking so long?" It didn't take that long, but we all saw it on TV. We saw it happen. And thank God the jury validated what we saw. So again, thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, for being there to call out to your mom. How heartbreaking was that? Call out for your mom. I can't breathe. But because of you, and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous with justice. And now we have to make sure justice prevails in the sentencing, but that's its own procedure. Our responsibility is to make sure that Karen Bass, who has been so open to justice with the bill that she put together, she wrote, and now trying to find areas of agreement in the Senate. Because unless we can change the law, this will be an episode. We change the law, we're going down a different path altogether. So thank you, Madam Chair Beatty, for your great leadership in all of this, for being a steady voice, to keeping some of us who just
overwhelmed by the news reports over the last year, and for our young people to see that there is hope for the future beginning now has got to be such a kairos moment in all of their lives. There's no question that we've all been heavy burdened with news and incidents that's been taking place in Minnesota especially. But for those young people to see what happened today, I think that they can go home feeling a little better today than they ever have in a long time.
That's right, and we were also talking over there saying that, this is a joyous moment for a lot of folks, and also that still there's work that needs to be done. This week is also still a heavy week because you guys are hosting the funeral services for Dante Wright. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is not an easy situation. The public viewing will begin tomorrow from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. tomorrow night, and then the funeral following on Thursday beginning at 12 noon. Our prayers are definitely with the Wright family, even though we are excited about what happened with the Floyd family for their happiness. But we are also mourning right now with the Wright family. But we have to do the hard work, which lies ahead in the next 2 days.
And for tonight, though, you guys are hosting another prayer service. I see a couple of people trickling in now.
Yes.
What is going to be the message that you want to send them home with?
We want all of America to know that this is Minnesota. This is the epic center where all this began. And we want all of Minnesota to know that the faith leaders are here together, different colors, different denominations, to share the same message that faith does work in this community, and we are here to prove that.
Bishop Howell, thank you so much for having us here. We'll stay throughout the prayer service, and of course, like I mentioned, it will happen at 4:30, and we'll be here keeping an eye on things and kind of talking to the community members and kind of keeping our finger on the pulse of the city tonight here. We'll send it back to the studio.
But at this time, we're not taking any statements from the caucus. We're going to go and continue to do the people's work. Thank you.
If anyone needs my contact, it's Aaron Washington, CBC Comms. Aaron.Washington and
She's dope, huh? Dope as hell, ain't she? Oh yeah, you better go get that story. My bad, I'm sorry.
Folks, JB Buno here with you live in the WFNF Stream Center here. We are live from the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Derek Chauvin, ex-Minneapolis police officer, found guilty on all charges. Second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. You've heard some of the reaction here that we have had. It's been an emotional past half hour. Many of you that I'm seeing here in the Facebook Live comment section in agreement with the decision. There's been some disagreement here in the Facebook Live comment section as well. Some people who have been saying curious as to why that there was a guilty verdict on all 3 charges. I want to point you in the direction of WFLA.com, the WFLA app. We're going to have explainers put up. We're going to be talking about what these charges mean, talk about the sentencing procedures now going forward. There's still many questions to be answered, but the fate of Derek Chauvin has been decided. That's one question that has been answered. He has been found guilty on all charges. Let's take you now here. We're going to be hearing from the governor of Minnesota here momentarily. That's the shot that we have here. Actually, no, I believe that this is... Oh, okay, this is the wrong feed. This is the city of Houston, Texas. So we'll be taking you to... I understand it that the Minnesota governor will be speaking here momentarily. This is the city of Houston, where a press conference is about to get underway. We'll take you back out here live now to the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We'll listen in.
That's what I'm talking about. What is right? He gotta got it. Thank you.
JB Buno here with you live in the WFLA Now Stream Center, folks. Again, all of what we know at this hour on WFLA.com and the WFLA app. We're going to be taking you to various feeds, including this one here on the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota here. Black Lives Matter is, of course, the theme here, as Derek Chauvin has been found guilty on all charges by a jury of his peers. Again, we're going to be looking for your reaction starting now here in the Facebook Live comment section. You can use hashtag HeyJB. I'll be looking for some of those comments, so we're going to feature here on screen here momentarily. To our YouTube audience, I see a lot of you joining here as well, reading comments here from Matt and James and Carlos, Big Man, Fabian, Anthony, Casey, Ewing. To everyone joining us here, welcome. We're going to continue to provide you with feeds here in the story that is unfolding here at this hour. Derek Chauvin, ex-Minneapolis police officer, found guilty on all charges here, as the reaction outpouring here into the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota.
All y'all presses out right now, because if God don't come there and we don't stand there, we gonna let him do it. You know how you play picker with that game and you keep picking out and it falls and then it stands like, the only thing you gotta do, when we keep knocking this bitch down, we gotta keep it going.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Ellison. I'm the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. And since the investigation and prosecution of this case began last May, everyone involved has pursued one goal: justice. We pursued justice wherever it led. When I became the lead prosecutor for the case, I asked for time and patience to review the facts, gather evidence, and prosecute for the murder of George Floyd to the fullest extent the law allowed. I want to thank the community for giving us that time and allowing us to do our work. That long, hard, painstaking work has culminated today. I would not call today's verdict justice, however, because justice implies true restoration. But it is accountability, which is the first step towards justice. And now the cause of justice is in your hands. And when I say your hands, I mean the hands of the people of the United States. George Floyd mattered. He was loved by his family and his friends. His death shocked the conscience of our community, our country, the whole world. He was loved by his family and friends. But that isn't why he mattered. He mattered because he was a human being. And there is no way we can turn away from that reality. The people who stopped and raised their voices on May 25th, 2020, were a bouquet of humanity, a phrase I stole from my friend Jerry Blackwell. A bouquet of humanity, old, young, men and women, black and white, a man from the neighborhood just walking to get a drink, a child going to buy a snack with her cousin, an off-duty firefighter on her way to a community garden, brave young women, teenagers, who press record on their cell phones. Why did they stop? They didn't know George Floyd. They didn't know he had a beautiful family. They didn't know he had been a great athlete, and they didn't know he was a proud father or that he had people in his life who loved him. They stopped and raised their voices, and they even challenged authority because they saw his humanity. They stopped and they raised their voices because they knew that what they were seeing was wrong. They didn't need to be medical professionals or experts in the use of force. They knew it was wrong, and they were right. These community members, this bouquet of humanity, did it again in this trial. They performed simple yet profound acts of courage. They told the truth, and they told the whole world the truth about what they saw. They were vindicated by the chief of police, by Minneapolis' longest-serving police officer, and by many other police officers who stepped up and testified as to what they saw and to what they knew. What happened on that street was wrong. We owe it, and we owe our gratitude to fulfilling their, we owe them our gratitude for fulfilling their civic duty and for their courage in telling the truth. To countless people in Minnesota and across the United States who joined them in peacefully demanding justice for George Floyd, we say, all of us, thank you. In the coming days, more may seek to express themselves again through petition and demonstration. I urge everyone to honor the legacy of George Floyd by doing so calmly, legally, and peacefully. I urge everyone to continue the journey to transformation and justice. It's in your hands now. I also want to address the Floyd family, if I may. Over the last year, the family of George Floyd had to relive again and again the worst day of their lives when they lost their brother, their father, their friend. I'm profoundly grateful to them for giving us the time we needed to prosecute this case. They have shown the world what grace and class and courage really look like. Although a verdict alone cannot end their pain, I hope it's another step on the long path toward healing for them. There's no replacing your beloved Perry, or Floyd, as his friends called him, but he is the one who sparked a worldwide movement, and that's important. We owe our thanks to the men and women of the jury who gave many hours of their time and attention to carefully listening to the evidence, weighing the facts, rendering a verdict. They are regular people from all walks of life, a lot like that bouquet of humanity on that corner on May 25th and in that courtroom. They answered the call, and they served in a landmark trial. They now deserve to return to their lives. If they ask you to respect their privacy, we ask you to honor that request. I want to acknowledge the remarkable team that helped us prosecute the case. We put everything we had into this prosecution. We presented the best case that we could, and the jury heard us, and we're grateful for that. We had the sole burden of proof in the case, and history shows that winning cases like these can be difficult. I'm proud of every hour, every minute, and every ounce of effort we put in this case, and let me tell you, we spent many hours working on this case, did we not? We, week after week, committee meeting after committee meeting, this team never let up and it never quit. We fought every day, and we did it together. The Attorney General's office together with the Hennepin County Attorney's office. Thank you, sir. And we did it together. I'm deeply grateful to everyone who worked on the case. Most of these folks will tell you it's a bad idea to put together a team of all Michael Jordans. Nobody would want to pass the ball. This team, that was their true strength, is sharing the load, passing the ball, understanding that all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. And that worked. Although the verdict has been rendered, this is not the end. In the coming weeks, the court will determine sentencing, and later this summer, we expect to present another case. We will not be talking about that. This verdict reminds us how hard it is to make enduring change. And I just want to finish by sharing some important historical legacy, if you allow me. In 1968, the Kerner Commission was formed to investigate the causes of uprisings across major American cities. And a man named Dr. Kenneth Clark, a famous African-American psychologist who, along with his equally accomplished psychologist wife, Mamie, contributed to compelling research in the Brown versus Board of Education case. And Dr. Clark testified at the Kerner Commission. And I want to quote you what he said. I read that report, the one in the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it was as if I were reading the report of investigating the committee of the Harlem riot in 1935, the report on investigating the Harlem riot in 1943, and the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riot. I must say again in candor to you, the members of this commission, it's like a kind of an Alice in Wonderland with the same moving picture reshown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendation, and the same inaction. Those are the words of Dr. Clark in 1968. Here we are in 2021. Here we are in 2021, still addressing the same problem. Since Dr. Clark testified, we have seen Rodney King, Abner Louima, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Laquan McDonald, Stephon Clark, Atiana Jefferson, Anton Black, Breonna Taylor, and now Dante Wright and Adam Toledo. This has to end. We need true justice. That's not one case. That is a social transformation that says that nobody's beneath the law and no one is above it. This verdict reminds us that we must make enduring systemic societal change. More than a month ago, months before George Floyd was murdered, the Minnesota Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington and I released the recommendations of our working group on reducing deadly force encounters with law enforcement. What all of us in that working group, including law enforcement, wanted is for everyone to go home safe. Anytime someone doesn't, everyone's lives are changed forever. We need to use this verdict as an inflection point. What if we just prevented the problem instead of having to try these cases? We don't want any more community members dying at the hands of law enforcement and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more law enforcement members having to face criminal charges and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more communities torn apart. One way to prevent this is to get into a new relationship where we as a society re-examine the use of force and our old settled assumptions. I'm so proud of Chief Arredondo and the Minneapolis police officers who by their testimony said enough is enough. And another way to prevent it is by acknowledging and lifting up everyone's humanity, helping communities heal, and officers be well. Another way to prevent it is with accountability. Passing laws and instituting policies and training is important, but they must be more than words on paper, and there must be accountability for violating them. With this verdict, we have brought some accountability. Finally, this verdict demands us to never give up the hope that we can make enduring change. Generations of people said slavery would never end. Generations said Jim Crow would never end. Generations said women would never be equal to men. Generations said if you were different in any way, you could never be a full and equal member of our society. Today, we have to end this travesty of recurring, enduring deaths at the hands of law enforcement. Those beliefs are things we have to focus our attention on. And as I now do close, I just want to say to you, the work of our generation is to put unaccountable law enforcement behind us. It's time to transform the relationship between community and the people who are sworn to protect them from one that is mistrustful, suspicious, and in some cases terrifying, into one that is empathetic, compassionate, and affirming. That will benefit everyone, including police officers who deserve to serve in a profession that is honored, in departments where they don't have to worry about colleagues who don't follow the rules. Now that work is in your hands. The work of our generation is to put an end to the vestiges of Jim Crow and the centuries of trauma, and finally put an end to racism. We can end it. It doesn't have to be with us into the future if we decide now to have true liberty and justice for all. The work of our generation is to say goodbye to old practices that don't serve us anymore and to put them all behind us. One conviction, even one like this one can create a powerful new opening to shed old practices and reset relationships. So with that, I just want to say that I do hope that people step forward and understand that nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. You can do something the way like everyday people like Donald Williams and Genevieve Hanson and Christopher Martin and Charles McMillan and all those teenagers and young people stepped up and did something. You can do things like help pass the George Floyd Justice and Accountability Act. It's in your hands. Let's get the work done. And now I'd like to invite my friend and partner in justice, Michael Freeman, Hennepin County Attorney.
We needed that moment. We needed that moment. We needed less distractions to see the brutality that we have allowed our tax dollars to create, our tax dollars to kill and punish. But today, on this day, we are moving forward. And I want to say this personally today. The thought that came into my mind when I heard guilty, guilty, and guilty was George Floyd on his last day, on his last hours, standing inside Cub Foods, dancing, dancing. And today, many people who are not born yet are dancing because we got a glimpse of justice. A glimpse of justice. But we have not got full justice until all of these families get justice. We don't have justice until we get the type of economic justice in this country. We don't have justice until we get educational justice for people of color in this country. But today, we are moving forward. And Minnesotans, God chose us. Let's carry on this burden. Let's shine a little bit of a light, a North Star light for the rest of this country. That we shine a light of justice for this country. And we live this guilty verdict flow on the Mississippi River all the way down to Delta to allow this country to taste what it's like for a little bit of victory. A little bit of victory. And with that I say, we thank God Almighty. We thank God Almighty. We thank God Almighty. But guess what? We are not done. Right. If you think we're going home, we're not going home. 3 more officers have killed George Floyd. We need justice from them. And Dante Wright was killed in the middle of this trial to show us that the justice system in this country and accountability has yet to be had. And we will demand justice by any means necessary.
1 down, 3 to go.
1 down, 3 to go. 1 down, 3 to go. 1 down, 3 to go. 1 down, 3 to go. 1 down, 3 to go.
1 down, 4 more to go. 4 more to go. And next, I'd like to go ahead and introduce the founder and the president of Families Supporting Families Against Police Brutality, Tashira Garraway.
I am Mark. I've been out here for over a year yelling for justice for all stolen lives. And I want to say that when Justin Tongan was beaten to death and thrown in a dumpster 11 years ago, I knew that there would be more. And May 25th, 2020, that more came because God told me it was going to start coming out. And it came out last year. And I've been out here fighting with my boots on the ground. And I've been yelling to the rooftops. That I've been yelling up to God, and today He let rain, justice rain down upon us. The floodgates of heaven is opened up now. And we got the justice that we deserve. And I will not stop fighting. They said we got 4 more to go. We got hundreds more to go. There's over 470 bodies in the state of Minnesota in the last 20 years that have led up to George Floyd. So that means we got over 470 more officers to go. We want them off the streets. We want them out of our community. We want those officers that allowed R.D.L. Sherrill to die in that jail. We want them out of the jail. All of them that have no value for the black.
Talk that! I just 32 years innocent. Talk that!
Yes, all of the officers. All of the officers that are involved with all of these hate crimes, because that's what they are. We gotta call them out for what they are. These are hate crimes, and these are murders. And we got all these officers to go. I don't want you guys to just shout and scream for the ones that hit the media. You shout and scream for every last one. Every last one. Every last one of our families deserve justice. And they killed a lot of people in Minnesota before George Floyd. And we want justice for them all. And we will not stop. I will not stop until we get justice for R.D.L. Sherrill, Justin Tongan, Cordell Handy, Marcus Davis, Kobe Eisler, Travis Jordan, Isaac Hayden, Jamar Crossman, Lando Castillo, and Delai, and all Brian Quinonez, and all stolen lives. We will not stop because it's too many more murders out here, and people gloat and gloat over the ones that they know about. But it's time to fight for everybody. It's time to fight for everybody. And we will not stop until we win. Families supporting families against police violence and communities united against police brutality. Minnesota Justice Coalition. Kids Minnesota. Be their voices. All of us are fighting together. Racial Justice Network. We're all fighting together, and we want you to fight for all of the rest of